Special thanks to these companies for being long-term partners of this channel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Zach. Here we talk about overlanding gear, builds, DIY, all sorts of stuff related to modifying your vehicle or improving your vehicle to get out there and adventure in the outdoors. Today we're talking about bump stops, particularly the Timbren bump stops. These are an alternative to stock bump stops and almost a necessity if you are adding a lift to your vehicle. There are many ways to quickly ruin a lift kit if you don't put on the proper bump stops on your vehicle. So getting some sort of aftermarket bump stop once you lift your vehicle is really important. Also, if you are lifting a certain amount that's not pretty standardized or designed for a product, you may need to add some lift spacers. There's a bunch of other things that are involved, but today I'm going to show you how to install the Timbren 4Runner bump stops on a 5th gen 4Runner, but they sell bump stops for so many different rigs, so go check them out. I'll have the bump stops linked down below, but honestly, if you don't have a 4Runner, they probably still sell nice bump stops for your rig too. They've got so many different products. Let's jump right into getting these bump stops unboxed, and then we will jump out to the rig and get them installed. So let's jump right into it. All right, so before we throw these on the vehicle, I just want to talk through what comes in the packaging. So this model number is the ABSTOF. These are the front bump stops. So I believe a lot of vehicles have these threads welded onto the frame. So I don't really know if you'll need this locking nut. That's at least how mine are. But it has this big Allen key right up through the center. And then it goes through this metal ring. This helps to be like a seating plate for the bump stop. But this is just a softer compound than the factory stuff, so it acts a little bit more like a spring, and it's also able to just take more of a beating than the stock bump stops. So that's kind of the point of using these aftermarket bump stops, is the stock ones are really not meant to be beaten on, whereas these have some spring components to them, so they're a little softer ride, and they're designed to be bottomed out more frequently. So that's why they call them active off-road bump stops. So these are the front ones, and then we'll talk about the rear ones. Installing bump stops also is not super challenging, so if this is something that you want to do on your rig, it's not going to be a super long project. So in this packaging, we've got one large bolt and two smaller bolts. The two smaller bolts, they are going to be used to attach this to your vehicle. There are welded on nuts to the frame where you're going to mount these in. And then this large bolt is what you're going to use to mount this entire bump stop to the bracket itself, which we have right here. And because these are stainless steel, I think they probably could use a little bit of anti-seize, but I'm pretty sure we want to put some blue Loctite on these so that they stay in place. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to throw some blue Loctite on these, and we're going to assemble these pieces right here for the rear so they're ready to go when we go out to the car. Okay, so here's the plate that actually bolts onto the vehicle. So all we're going to do here is set this up appropriately. So we've got the nut there. We're going to lay this plate on here, and then in the bottom of this bump stop you can see there's that silver washer that's going to go in there as well. And then this bolt we are going to thread right down through the middle of this and put some blue Loctite on this. So this bolt is a 3/4, so just so you're aware. So from what I can tell, I just assembled this one, and there was some kind of interesting play in the bump stop, and it's probably designed to be this way, but I'm a little afraid it might rattle. I'm not quite sure. So I have some of these extra M10 washers just laying around. I'm just gonna toss one more of these in there just to add a little bit of spacing, because now, well, let me just show you what I mean. If we put this together and I tighten it all the way down, from all the other videos I've watched and what I've read, I think it's okay for them to have this kind of play. I don't think that is like a mistake in their design. I think that's how they design it. I'm just a little afraid that that might cause some rattle or something. So I'm just gonna toss one extra washer in there. I don't think it's gonna hurt anything, and I think it will help keep everything just a little bit tighter. So that's what we're gonna do. This bolt I still need to put a little bit of blue Loctite on, so we'll just do that now. Drop that one washer on. Some people have been using magnets or something to put this through the hole, but I've just been kind of trying to line it up and drop it in. There. It's worked every time so far when I've done it, so keep doing it, I guess. Bolt is seated. Now I'm just gonna tighten it down and we'll go get these installed. There. So now it'll spin, which I don't mind, but there just isn't that rocking noise, which seemed a little bit rattly. All right, so now, like I was saying, we just have these other bolts here. These will go in each of these holes on the sides, and this is how it will bolt to the frame in the rear. It's nice that there's sliding channels in here, so if you use adjustable rear control arms like I do from Dobinsons, you can actually adjust this slightly so that it will follow where your solid axle is. And so when it bottoms out, it's not like you're limited to where the stock mounting point was. There is some adjustability. So super good. Got this all ready. Let's jump out to the vehicle and let's get these installed.
Okay, so if you have a stock bump stop, you probably have this just sitting right here, just like this. And to remove these bolts, I would recommend hitting them with just some PB Blaster. I actually recently put these on with some, good anti-seize, so I'm not too worried about taking them off because I've been running this Toy-Tech spacer, which is kind of the super budget way of setting up your bump steps. It just lowers them. So I've just sprayed these with some anti-seize. We're gonna pull those out and then we're gonna install the new ones. All right, so I got the bump stop off and I've just kind of finger tightened these in. I've put some blue Loctite on these stainless steel bolts because we don't want to tighten them down too aggressively, but we don't want them to also move. So that's what they look like. And for pulling out my old bump stop spacer, these socket Allen keys are a lifesaver. You can put so much more torque on any sort of Allen bolt, so I definitely recommend, if you don't have a set of these, go pick some up. They are well worth the money, so you don't strip out Allen bolt sockets. It'll just be peace of mind. There we go. So I've got this kind of installed, basically finger tightened. I haven't cranked down at all on those bolts because I want to jack up the differential and figure out where this is going to hit the axle. So that's good for now. Let's put the tire back on and do the other side. Okay, so it's not a bad idea when you're installing bump stops to actually test them in your driveway. So, it's not maybe the safest way to do it. I don't love how I tested it, but the important thing is really you just need to make sure this is actually doing its job. And I may switch this in the future. But for now, it's always better to have your bump stops lower than higher because your bump stops are preventing you from bottoming out your shocks and ruining your shocks. And so, lower is better than higher. And so what I did is I actually kept my spacer because I'm under the hunch that my Dobinson MRR system, since it's a long travel system, has a longer shock body than a standard 3-inch lift. And therefore, maybe bottoms out a little bit sooner because the shaft inside of the strut is so long. So I've kept my spacer in because I started to really flex my vehicle and my axle was not really getting very close to this before it was even, almost bottoming out this. All of this rubber, like accordion tile protective stuff was basically completely compressed. So I was getting a little worried, and not to mention this actually was a little bit too far forward. Only about half of the spring was touching the axle, and that was with it adjusted all the way back. And so with the Toy-Tech spacer, it moves this bracket back a little bit and a little bit lower, which I think is going to be perfect. So maybe if you have a long travel system, run one of these spacers, and if you don't, maybe you'll be okay. I have adjustable rear links, so this lower rear control arm, and then there's also an upper one in here somewhere. They're adjustable, and my axle is actually shifted back about 1/2 inch from stock because of how I set them. So that could be another contributing factor for aligning this bump stop. But I think this is a good approach, and I can always adjust it in the future. These are super easy to pull from the vehicle and whatnot. So I actually ended up using the washers from the kit, but the bolts from the Toy-Tech kit to mount this up. I put anti-seize like crazy on these bolts because this is aluminum and the bolts are stainless steel. So that means those can seize like crazy inside of that aluminum. And then I put some Loctite, and I just didn't tighten these super tight, and they bolt into the spacers. So I like how that turned out, and hopefully it works well. So I finally got a front bump stop removed that I had a local off-road shop install when I got my front 3-inch Old Man Emu lift. And this was really hard to get at, so I had to use this little pivot, and thank goodness it broke free. The bolt that was in there was one of these black, I don't know if they're like a black oxide or something bolt, but I have found, seem to seize and rust kind of quickly. I'm not sure if that's, you know, actually true or if that's just been my experience, but anyways, this was a pain to break loose. Thank goodness my pivot actually worked. And then the problem was the pivot, I wasn't feeling too strongly that the pivot was actually gonna withstand the torque I needed. So what I did is I hooked up my Allen socket to this drill bit, and then I used a 1/4 inch ratcheting wrench to turn my drill bit, because the problem is your lower control arm gets in the way for the bulk of this, so you can't just, you know, super easily swap it out without dropping your lower control arm. So finally got it free. I'm trying to decide whether to put blue Loctite or just anti-seize on this, because up here in the Midwest we've got built-in blue Loctite with the rust and corrosion that happens within a month of installing anything on your vehicle. So I'm just trying to figure out if that's worth it or not. So I don't know. I suppose we should just use blue Loctite, but I'm kind of on the fence. This looks to be a really hard bolt, and typically with blue Loctite you put it on something that you can't torque very hard and you just want to stay. So since there is a little Allen key in the bottom of this, and this bump stop actually seems to be a nice height, you know, I can put this socket in here and I can actually turn it with a wrench. Whereas with these super cheap bump stops, this socket is like an awkward depth into there. And so, you know, maybe if you could get a 1-inch 3/8" drive, you could do this, but like I had to use this awkward pivot just to get inside this bump stop. So we'll see. So far I'm liking this design, and it seems a lot easier to install because one of these sockets, you know, fits in there perfectly. So anyways, let's keep on moving.
So these bump stops did take a little bit of tweaking. I had to improvise a little bit last minute because I have a lot larger lift than what the standard kit is designed for. Timbren Industries does sell a spacer kit so that you can run these rear bump stops correctly. I was just, you know, basically not proactive enough in planning for those spacers, and so thankfully I just had my own, and that's what I used to install these bump stops. Not to mention, this problem maybe kind of arose because I have the long travel kit from Dobinsons. So the long travel kit has a little bit more travel, and since I have really heavy duty springs, I have a lot more lift. If you're just running a standard 5th gen 4Runner lift, I presume these are kind of designed around running a 2 to 3 inch lift in the rear. Whereas mine right now, I think sits somewhere at like 5 or 6 inches. So it's a little bit gnarly, so to speak. And that's why my truck has such aggressive rake right now. But those are kind of some of the reasons why this kit just turned out this way. It's not that it's designed wrong or anything like that. It mainly was just the way that I installed it on my rig. I probably could have been a little bit better at planning, and then I could have used some of the spacers from Timbren Industries. So all of the install went great though. The adjustability in these is really nice because they have these little slots where your screw can slide. That's really important because if you have a set of adjustable rear links like I do from Dobinsons, where I can move my entire solid axle front and back a little bit, there's a little bit of movement there since they're adjustable. Being able to adjust your bump stops so that they actually will hit the axle body when you are under full compression is important. So, you know, it's really nice that they have that adjustability. Otherwise, some of the other options out there on the market don't have any adjustability. So you really have to make sure that your axle is hitting in the same spot, or else, you know, your bump stops really aren't doing anything helpful for your rig. So That was a little bit of a long-winded conclusion, but I just want to kind of clarify how that situation ended up playing out. And I've loved them so far. They're really supposed to be a little bit of a higher end bump stop compared to some of the off-the-shelf options that are a little more on the cheaper end. These do have kind of a special rubber compound that make them a little bit more comfortable and pliable while still being really durable and allowing for, you know, repetitive hammering of your bump stops. So stoked to be running these. Thank you, Timbren Industries, for partnering with me on this video. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, please consider subscribing, and I will catch you all in the next video. Peace.